He said that the first time the phone rang in that house, everyone thought it was just a line malfunction, one of those old noises that still happen even with modern technology. But that night, the phone didn't just ring. It called from the basement's internal number, and the detail that froze everyone wasn't the time, the tone, or the silence on the other end. It was the fact that that house simply didn't have a basement. It never had. There was no staircase, door, access, nothing. It was a house built directly on the concrete, with no empty space underneath. Even so, the display glowed with an impossible phrase: "Call from basement." The whole family woke up to the shrill sound echoing through the hallway. He got up first, still groggy with sleep, imagining it was an alarm, that someone was messing with the wires outside. But when he got to the phone in the living room, he realized it was flashing as if it were a warning. Not random, not accidental, but directed. The call continued, insistently, vibrating throughout the house, as if it were calling specifically for him. The mother appeared on the stairs seconds later, startled, asking if it was some kind of prank call. But the father, standing further back, couldn't take his eyes off the screen. His expression said it all. This wasn't a technical error. This was a call. The phone rang for exactly 13 seconds and then stopped abruptly, as if someone had cut the line on the other end. Total silence. The house became still, heavy, as if listening along with it. He took a deep breath and pressed the call history button. The number was there. An internal code that only existed in houses with more than one line connected. And next to it, the word that neither of them should see: basement. He pressed it again, trying to understand. The screen didn't change. The connection was real. That impossible connection had happened. They tried to forget. They tried. They spent the following days pretending it was a glitch, a coincidence, just a bug. But that didn't last long. 5 nights later, at exactly 3:11 in the morning, the phone rang again. And that time, when he answered, there was no silence. There was breathing. Slow, deep breathing, as if someone were glued to the phone, inhaling the air with effort. He froze. Mom ran downstairs, Dad followed, but no one could speak. The breathing continued, rhythmic, heavy, wet, as if coming from a damp, cramped, subterranean place. And then, on the other end of the line, a voice emerged in a cracked whisper, saying something that didn't seem directed only at him, but at the whole house. "I'm still here." He hung up immediately. He threw the phone on the floor. His mother started to cry. His father turned white as a sheet, because that phrase, that voice, was not unknown. They had heard it years ago when his grandfather was still alive. A voice that appeared on old tapes, recorded unintentionally while the family was cleaning the attic. A voice that his grandfather swore came from under the house, before he died, repeating that what was down there would one day come up. But there was no down there. There was no basement. There was no space. Or perhaps there was something deeper than walls, concrete and architecture, something that didn't depend on physical construction to exist, something that didn't need stairs, a door, or access, something that was there long before the house was built. And that early morning, as the silence grew heavy, again the phone vibrated for the 3rd time, before anyone even dared to approach. It didn't ring. It just vibrated. A very specific notification. New voicemail. Source: basement. He said no one wanted to listen to the voicemail. Not his mother, not his father, not him. The simple fact that there was a recording coming from a place the house didn't have was absurd enough to leave them paralyzed for long minutes. The phone remained in the center of the room, still, silent, but with that notification shining like a pulse, a heart beating within a cold light. Run new message. Basement. It was as if the whole house was waiting for their decision, waiting for the play button, hoping someone would release what was trapped there. His mother insisted on leaving it for the next day. His father said the phone was corrupted, defective, that it was just interference. But he knew, because the breathing he heard on the previous connection wasn't static, it wasn't noise, it wasn't wind. It was presence. It was life. It was someone or something using the air of a non-existent place to communicate. He picked up the phone with a trembling hand. The device was icy, so icy it felt like it had been left in a freezer. The temperature of that object didn't match anything around it. It was like touching metal buried deep in the ground. When he pressed the message button, his mother yelled at him not to do it. His father stepped forward to try to stop him. But the play had already been cramped. The room fell silent, a silence so heavy it seemed to push their shoulders down. For 3 seconds, nothing could be heard but a faint hiss, like wind passing through a very narrow opening. Then, slowly, the same breathing from the previous call began. A deep, slow, damp noise, as if someone were breathing with difficulty inside a cramped, stuffy, dark place. The breathing continued for long seconds, until something changed. The sound began to echo in a wrong way. It echoed as if it came from a stone corridor or from inside a closed structure where each breath reverberates like a distant groan. But there was no such place in the house. There was no basement. There was no underground chamber. There was no space for this echo to exist. And then the voice emerged. A voice that wasn't human enough to be human, but also wasn't supernatural enough to sound distant. It was something in between, like someone trying to imitate language after a long time without using it. The voice said the father's name, perfectly, without error, without hesitation. It was as if she had been by his side for years, listening, memorizing, waiting. The father turned pale. The mother pressed her mouth together. The phone continued playing the recording, and the voice spoke again. "You went down." The father began to recoil, shaking his head, denying it, as if he had just been accused of an impossible crime. He swore, he repeated aloud, that he had never gone down anywhere, never been in any basement, never seen any stairs in that house. But the voice didn't stop. It began to breathe more heavily, as if it were approaching the surface, as if it were climbing step by step in an invisible way. Then it said something worse. "You left me. I'm still here." The mother began to cry. It wasn't a cry of fear, it was a cry of recognition. He looked at her, confused, and saw in her eyes something she had always avoided showing: guilt. Old guilt. Guilt that makes you sick. Guilt that weighs on the soul. He realized at that moment that there was something in the family history that had never been said, something they carried like a deep secret, buried long before he was born. The father finally yelled to hang up. He pressed the button hard, but the phone didn't turn off. The voice continued. The breathing grew closer, the echo more intense, and a new noise began, scratching. Slow, continuous scratching against a solid surface, as if long fingernails were scraping damp concrete. The noise seemed to come from the audio, but it also seemed to come from the floor, from the living room floor, from the floor of the entire house. He then bent down. He placed his hand on the floor, and he felt something impossible. Vibration, a slight but constant vibration, as if something were moving down there. But there couldn't be anything down there. That house had no basement, no empty space. And yet there was movement. The mother recoiled against the wall, covering her mouth with her hands, while tears streamed down her face. The father fell to his knees, repeating, "No, no, no," as if he were seeing a ghost emerge from within himself. Then the phone, no longer obeying buttons, played the last sentence of the recording, spoken in a broken, irregular whisper, full of hatred and longing at the same time. "Don't leave me here again." At that instant, the floor made a dry crack, a hollow sound, a deep sound, a sound of wood giving way over an empty space. And for the first time since they moved into that house, everyone was absolutely certain there was something beneath them, something alive, something that knew that family, something that had been left there once before. He said that after that crack from the floor, no one moved for long seconds. It was as if the whole house had held its breath, waiting for which of them would be the first to admit the impossible. The phone suddenly fell silent, as if the very voice of the basement, that basement that didn't exist, had decided to wait. The father was kneeling, staring at the floor, as if he were trying to recognize something in the lines of the wood. The mother trembled so much, she seemed about to fall. Her eyes weren't fixed on the floor. They were fixed on memory, in something she had tried to forget for years. When the vibration under the floor finally ceased, he asked what was happening. His father didn't answer. His mother didn't answer. Only after minutes, when the house returned to its heavy silence, did his mother finally whisper, "He wasn't supposed to hear you." The phrase struck the entire room like a thin blade, impossible to ignore. He insisted, his voice breaking, "Hear what? Hear whom? Hear from where?" His mother held her head in her hands and said something that seemed torn from the depths of her soul. "Your grandfather never built a house on solid concrete. Never. He built it on a hole." His father closed his eyes tightly, as if it were physical pain. But he didn't deny it. He didn't try to invent an excuse. He simply confirmed it with the heavy silence of those who carry ancient guilt. She continued, each word trembling. "It was an old place, very old, that was already there before us. He said it was an underground shelter, but he never explained what for. He only said that nobody should open the door that was down there. One day he went down. He stayed there for hours. He came back pale, didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. And then he ordered the hole to be covered up. He ordered everything to be concreted over. He ordered it to be forgotten. But her grandfather never managed to forget. He talked to himself at night. He murmured names that nobody understood, and he swore that sometimes he heard someone calling for him from under the ground. She stopped, trembling, looking at the phone as if expecting it to ring again. "When your father turned 23, he went down too." Her father finally looked up, his eyes filled with a terror that no adult should bear. "I didn't go down willingly," he said in a whisper. "I was called." The mother continued, now crying. "He came back different. He always seemed incomplete, as if he had left something down there, or someone." It was then that the father confessed the part that no one knew, not even her. "I wasn't alone down there." The whole room froze. He asked, unable to breathe, "Who were you with?" The father answered, looking at the floor, as if expecting the thing to hear him from there, "With myself." The mother fell back into a sitting position. He felt his stomach churn. The father continued, "When I got to the deepest part, there was a door, an old wooden door without a handle, and in front of it, sitting on the floor, there was someone. It was me, my voice, my face, my breath, only he was crying, crying as if he had been trapped there for a long time." He swallowed hard, the air stuck in his throat. "You went in?" The father shook his head. "I tried, but he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. 'Don't leave me here again.' It was the same phrase from the recording, the same voice, the same plea, the same desperation." The father said he ran away. He ran to the stairs, stumbled up, closed the hole, poured concrete over it and never spoke of it again. But something, a presence, a shadow of himself, remained there, trapped, forgotten, abandoned, and now it was calling again. The worst came next. The father, his voice breaking, said something that made the whole house seem to shrink. That one down there wasn't me. It was what was left of me. And at that moment they heard 3 slow knocks from the floor. A pause. 2 loud knocks. A lingering scratch that made the floorboards vibrate. The mother covered her mouth, the father began to cry, and he, paralyzed, felt the phone vibrate on its own on the table. On the screen, only a single phrase, "I can see you. I can see you." He said that nobody wanted to break the floor. Nobody even wanted to enter the room where the phone had last vibrated. But after that message, "I can see you," there was no other choice. The house was no longer a safe place. The floor was no longer the floor. The silence seemed to breathe, and throughout the early morning they heard spaced-out knocks, sometimes weak, sometimes strong, as if something or someone was testing its own prison. At 6 in the morning, when the light finally touched the living room floor, the father made the decision. "If I don't go, it will come up." The mother begged him not to do it. But behind the despair, there was something that nobody could disguise anymore. It wasn't just calling. It was waiting. And nothing that was thrown on top, cement, wood, silence, oblivion, would be enough to prevent what was down there from finding a way back. He and his father began to remove the living room carpet. Beneath, there was a faint circular mark on the floor, a thin, almost invisible crack that ran through the center of the house like an ancient scar. The mother said she had never seen it before. The father said it had always been there. It was impossible to know who was telling the truth, or if the floor itself was shifting to reveal what it had hidden. With a sledgehammer, the father struck for the first time. The sound of the impact echoed deep, too deep, as if the blow had struck a vast space beneath them. A space that shouldn't exist, a space that responded to the sound with a slow echo, as if it had walls, corridors, depth. The second blow made the floor tremble. The third opened a crack, and from the crack came a cold breeze. Not fresh air, not outside wind, but that kind of cold that seems to rise from beneath the earth, carrying with it a forgotten smell. A damp, dense smell, as if old wood was silently rotting in a place without light. When the opening was large enough, the father knelt beside it and illuminated it with a flashlight. The beam of light vanished almost instantly, sucked into a darkness so dense it seemed liquid. But seconds later, they saw what was there, and it was worse than anything they had imagined. It wasn't a basement. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't an ancient foundation. It was a corridor, a narrow, deep corridor made of old, damp bricks, shrouded in a darkness that seemed to breathe. The walls were low, as if they had been made for someone to walk hunched over. On the floor, marked by dirt and time, were footprints, small but too long, as if they didn't belong to human feet. And at the far end there was a door identical to the one his father had described. No handle, no crack, no logic. He shone the light again, and he saw something moving behind the door, a low figure, as if someone were sitting on the floor, head bowed, arms hanging at their sides. A trembling figure, a breathing figure. His father held his breath. "It's him!" The mother recoiled against the wall, silent tears streaming down her face. "Don't open that door. For God's sake, don't open it." But it was too late. The thing behind the door heard voices, heard footsteps, heard life, and it began to raise its head, first slowly, as if every inch were a painful struggle, then faster, as if recognizing something. Darkness swallowed part of the movement, but they saw enough, the head turning, the shoulders trembling, and the face that looked like the father's, but thinner, paler, more sunken, as if drained of everything that makes someone human. Then came the sound, not a voice, not breathing, a lament so deep it seemed to pierce skin, bone, memory, and along with the lament, the phrase that echoed within their minds like a scream trapped for decades. "Why did you leave me here?" The father fell to his knees. The mother leaned against the wall, sobbing. And he, motionless, felt that he was looking not at a monster, not at a ghost, not at an entity, but at the broken piece of a human being, an abandoned piece, forgotten, replaced, the lost version of his father, the part of him that remained down there, and that was now trying to rise to complete what was missing. The ground around him vibrated violently, as if the entire corridor were moving. The door creaked, the wood creaking, and for the first time something pushed from the inside out. He said that when the door began to move from the inside out, the sound didn't seem like wood being pushed. It sounded like something tearing at his own memory, as if that subterranean space had been forgotten for so long that the simple act of opening a passage created an impossible echo, suffocated, trapped between walls that had never seen light. The entire corridor vibrated, making the bricks tremble as if they were breathing. And behind the door, the thing, the broken man, the abandoned piece of the father, pushed with an almost childlike desperation, like someone trying to return home after decades locked in the dark. The father fell seated beside the opening, on the floor, unable to rise. His eyes were wide, but not with fear. It was a cruel, profound, almost spiritual recognition. He was looking at himself, at what he had left there, at what he had never dared to face. Each push from behind the door made his body tremble as if it were he, and not the wood, who was trying to break free from confinement. The father murmured, "I didn't want to leave you. I didn't want to leave you." And the mother sobbed, unable to look at the hole. The door opened an inch, then 2, then 3. From the opening, not an arm, not a hand, not a deformed creature emerged. What came out first was a sound, a short, dry, heavy sound, like someone gasping for air for the first time in a long time. A sigh that seemed to traverse decades, a sigh from someone who had finally found the one who abandoned them. Then the hand appeared, pale, thin, too long, distorted by time, by darkness, by isolation. The fingers, as they bent towards the floor, snapped in a way that wasn't human, but not because they were monstrous, but because they had been frozen there for longer than any body should endure. The hand braced itself on the floor, trying to lift the rest of the body. And, when the face appeared in the crack, the entire room seemed to cease to exist. It wasn't the face of the current father. It was his face as it should have been, if part of him hadn't been abandoned in the underground corridor. It was a lifeless face, colorless, soulless. A face trapped in a state of continuous suffering, as if that being had lived all the pain the father should have felt over the years, as if it were a sum of traumas that were never expressed. The creature, the other father, the broken version, raised its head and looked at them for the first time. The gaze wasn't one of anger, nor of hatred. It was a moment of confusion, as if he couldn't understand how so many years had passed without anyone returning, as if he no longer recognized anything, his family, his home, the surface of the earth. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound that came out wasn't a voice. It was a mixture of crying and breathing, a painful, desperate noise, hungry for words he no longer remembered how to form. And then he reached out his hand. Not to hurt, not to pull anyone, but to ask for something. His father, overcome with guilt, approached the edge. His mother shouted for him to stop, but he didn't hear. He lowered one knee, then the other. Each of his movements seemed accompanied by the shadow of the man inside the corridor, as if that mirrored being were reacting to his gestures with a delay, trying to synchronize with its complete version. He said it was in that instant, in that impossible second, that he understood the truth. It wasn't a spirit, it wasn't a monster, it wasn't an entity. It was living memory, forgotten flesh, a separate consciousness. This is what happens when a deep trauma splits in two. The body rises, but the rest remains behind. And that thing sitting behind the door was everything the father had buried in life. The father reached out his hand too. The two ends of the same life almost touched. Almost. Because, when they were less than an inch apart, the hallway beneath them vibrated with a roar that seemed to come from the entire earth. The door slammed violently against the inner wall, and something, not the creature, but the space, pulled the being back with brutal force, as if the place were not just a room, but a prison, unwilling to let its occupant out. The broken version of the father screamed, a formless, wordless scream echoing through decades of pain. And he was dragged back into the darkness. The door slammed shut, the sound ceased, the vibration stopped. The hallway went silent. The house, however, did not, because at that exact second, the phone rang. Not once, not twice, 13 times in a row, each ring louder than the last. On the screen there was only one phrase, "It's not over." And since that day, every morning at 3:11 a.m., the family hears slow footsteps under the floor, footsteps that don't belong to anyone alive and that should never be there. Now tell me, you who are listening to this story, have you ever heard something coming from a place that doesn't exist? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if this only happens in old houses or if it happens near you too.